Today, 5 companies decide what 4 billion people see, buy, and believe at all times, more power than any government in history. But the technology behind them isn't new. It was dreamed up long ago in the Soviet Union. After World War II, the world was at war over how countries should be organized. The Soviet Union pushed for socialism, like a farm, orderly and planned, where the government owns everything and decides who gets what. The USA pushed for capitalism, more like a forest, wild and free, where citizens can own things and compete in a free market. When Stalin died unexpectedly in 1953, Soviet scientists saw an opportunity. Instead of replacing him with another dictator, they proposed replacing him with a computer. But for 20 years, they disagreed on one fundamental point: how to surrender their power to an algorithm. This dream of using technology to make socialism work without corruption was finally tried in Chile in 1971, creating the first socialist internet. It worked briefly, but was seen as a clear threat to capitalist ideology.
Comunistas asquerosos tienen que salir todos de Chile!
And was destroyed in a US-backed coup. But in an ironic twist, American corporations quietly started building the exact same system inside their firms. Massive computer networks controlled automatically by algorithmic decision. And now they've grown into something that's not quite a state and not quite a company, but bigger than both. And so both belief systems, socialism and capitalism, ended up with the same end solution: AI decisions driving society. But if you follow the history, this isn't so surprising, because both sides began their fight using the exact same military strategy, and that strategy shaped everything that followed. During the war, both sides faced the same impossible challenge at the top. How do you coordinate thousands of planes, ships, troops when information floods in faster than any human can process? They solved it through hierarchical command and control, where information flows up and decisions flow down. A general never directly commanded 100,000 troops. Instead, they commanded a handful of officers who commanded other officers, all the way down to squad leaders who were controlling just 10 soldiers. This led to one of the great innovations in military coordination: the war room. They began as maps spread out on huge tables, where women called plotters used long magnetic rakes to push wooden blocks across the map. Each block represented things like aircraft formations with their numbers and altitude, and senior officers watched from above, making decisions based on this live representation of the war. And these war rooms left a lasting impression on one young British officer, Stafford Beer. To him, it looked and felt like a human nervous system, with information flowing up to a brain that made all the decisions in the war room. All militaries eventually copied this war room approach. And this system worked brilliantly because everyone agreed on the objective, which was to defeat the enemy. That drove every decision. What struck Beer was that militaries were essentially running socialist systems. Centralized planning of resources, no private ownership, everyone working towards a common goal. They had solved the coordination problem without markets or profit. And so could this work beyond war? This was the idea in the air at the time. Socialism was embraced by much of the intellectual elite. Einstein himself had argued in 1949 that a planned economy which adjusts production to the needs of the community could work, but only if you had the information technology to coordinate it all. And with Turing pioneering the digital computer revolution in the 1950s, that technology suddenly seemed possible. This kicked off decades of Beer's research, where he designed control centers during the early boom in digital computers and television. His sketches from this period seem to predict the future decades ahead of the time, with people sitting and staring at screens and asking questions of centralized computers. But when you try to apply this military war room efficiency to an entire economy, something breaks down. Stalin's system worked when he could focus on a few simple objectives, like build more steel. But as the Soviet economy grew complex, no single mind could coordinate everything. Because every decision triggered 10 more decisions. More steel meant more coal. which meant more miners, which meant more housing, but housing required cement, which needed the same limestone quarries as steel production. The complexity exploded exponentially because everything depended on everything else. And bad information made these decisions even worse, because without profit signals, factory managers could lie to protect themselves. This is fundamentally why the Soviet system could mobilize millions for war, but couldn't figure out how to stock bread and soap in the same store. And on March 5th, 1953, Stalin died suddenly of a stroke. And he had eliminated anyone who could challenge his authority and left behind no obvious successor by design. So the entire coordination system that had run on his personal judgment suddenly collapsed into chaos as people competed for power. But this crisis led to an opportunity for the technocratic visionaries, such as Stafford Beer. By this point, Beer's wartime operational research was gaining recognition, and the Soviet scientists proposed something that aligned with his thinking. Instead of replacing Stalin with another dictator, why not replace him with a computer system? A network that could process the growing complexity of information in the world and make decisions based on algorithms, not the whims or paranoia of a single person. In 1959, serious efforts were underway to do this, such as the proposed Project Red Book, a distributed network of computers to automatically manage the entire Soviet economy. But the defense minister killed the plan. In 1962, they tried again with the OGAS project, another computer-controlled economy. This was also rejected. For over 20 years, brilliant Soviet scientists kept trying different approaches to the same problem, but every attempt failed for the same reason. The problem was not the technology, it was the competing interests within the party. No one was willing to surrender their decision-making power to an algorithm. Meanwhile, American corporations were quietly solving the same coordination problem, but in a completely different way. Companies had been copying military hierarchy for decades, but they added something crucial that the Soviets missed: profit as a coordination signal. This gave every manager at every level a clear way to make decisions autonomously. General Motors showed how powerful this could be. By the 1920s, they were already coordinating hundreds of thousands of workers across dozens of plants. And plant managers knew their profit targets. The line supervisors tracked their efficiency metrics, and even individual workers had production bonuses. Every level could make decisions because profit told them what was working. And as these companies grew, they began swallowing up what markets used to do for them. So instead of buying steel from suppliers, GM made their own steel. Instead of hiring trucking companies, they ran their own trucking fleet. It was faster and cheaper to control everything internally than contracting everything out in the open market. But one of the most reliable ways to boost profit at these firms was to cut costs, and that meant automating away the company itself, starting from the bottom up. First with optimizing human movements, and then replacing them with machines that replicated their pattern of movement. Automation climbed steadily up the organizational pyramid. Physical work, and then paperwork, and then decision-making. Decision-making was the last human-only domain. But by the 1960s, some visionaries started asking, what if machines could think and decide too, and we just automate the decision-making? This question was about to get its first real-world test, but not in a corporate boardroom, but in a country that just had an election that shocked everyone.
El domingo Chile va a decidir si quiere marxismo o quiere libertad.
At this time, Chile was the world's most watched political experiment. Salvador Allende had just become the first democratically elected socialist president in history.
Que se acuse constitucionalmente al presidente y lo saquen el 21 de mayo mismo, porque tiene destruido, molido.
And both superpowers were paying attention. The Americans saw a dangerous precedent that could spread. The Soviets saw validation that people would vote for socialism in the West, no revolution needed. Allende immediately began taking government ownership over all major industries, copper mines, banks, factories, and by late 1971, the traditional bureaucracy was drowning in complexity. He faced the same challenge that had stumped Stalin. How do you coordinate a complex economy without markets? And Flores, Allende's tech minister, believed the answer was cybernetics, an emerging field that borrowed from biology and computer science, but that few people actually understood. So they called Stafford Beer, whose books on cybernetic management were now famous. When it came to controlling a complex system, Beer realized everyone had it backwards. What if you didn't need commanders at all? What if the information itself could coordinate the system? This was cybernetics. Think of your thermostat at home. When your house gets cold, the thermostat doesn't need to send a report to you so you can decide what to do. The information about temperature directly controls the heating system, turning it on or off when needed. Beer realized this was the future of coordination on a massive scale. In a cybernetic system, the measurements of a system control the system. Instead of information flowing up to human decision makers, information could flow through networks and trigger responses automatically, like a million thermostats connected together, each sensing conditions and responding automatically across an entire country. It promised a third way, not quite socialism, with central planners making all the decisions, not quite capitalism, which lets competition and prices guide decisions through markets. Cybernetics would use information itself, measurements of everything in society, for algorithms controlling computer networks which were connected to everything. So this was Beer's moment. He jumped at it and moved from Britain to Chile, but had to work fast and cheap. So his team relied on existing technology, old telephone lines, pre-existing telex machines scattered across the country, and connected them all to a single mainframe computer they had access to. An amazing feat of engineering, connecting 150 factories very quickly. This was Project Cybersyn, Chile's cybernetic nervous system. Its control room looked like a spaceship. It was the future, built in 1972. I've been working with startups for 15 years, and there's one problem that keeps coming up: software chaos. You start with one tool for your website, another for customer management, a third for invoicing, and before you know it, you're juggling logins, dealing with different customer support teams. And worst of all, when one company gets acquired, like Sendinblue became Brevo, it broke my entire workflow. That's why Odoo's pitch is so smart. Instead of 10 different tools that don't talk to each other, they built one platform that does everything. Website, CRM, invoicing, inventory, all integrated. So when a customer places an order, it automatically updates your inventory and triggers your billing. No more data silos. And here's what I really love. Any single application is completely free for life. No credit card required. Want the full suite? 15 days free, and when you upgrade, it's just $25 a month for all 45 applications, plus hosting support and a free domain for a year. Support this channel and check out Odoo at the link below and start with their free app today. By 1972, just a few months later, it was working. Imagine it. At 4 p.m., a production shortage detected at a copper mine would cause a telex machine to type out the alert. At 4:05, a central computer automatically routes the message to 3 backup suppliers. 4:15, trucks are dispatched. No human coordinator needed. The information itself was solving the problem. The same thing we see today when Waze reroutes traffic around an accident, or Uber surges drivers to busy areas, but applied to Chile's entire economy. And to Beer's surprise, other factories started demanding to connect to this network, and it rapidly grew to over 500 subscribers. Factory managers discovered they could coordinate directly with each other, bypassing decision makers entirely. And Beer's vision was expanding. Why stop at factories? He proposed connecting every home in Chile with little dials, where citizens could signal their needs directly to the network with positive or negative feelings about the government. This would be a true cybernetic democracy. And on September 11th, 1973, everything went dark. screens went black. Telex machines, which were constantly clicking, fell silent. Within hours, military officers were stabbing the operation room slides with knives, systematically destroying every piece of the system. The US-backed coup shut it down. What you're seeing here is one of the most remarkable moments in documentary history. Filmmakers were inside the palace with cameras rolling when the coup began. One cinematographer was shot while filming, but kept recording until he died. The footage smuggled out by the director, hidden in his underwear. The technocratic socialist experiment was over and was never turned on again. But at that exact same moment, 3,000 miles north in California, something else was quietly growing. ARPANET. Originally funded by the Defense Department to help university researchers share computing resources, and then expanded for military communications that could survive nuclear war. No single point of failure could take it down. If one connection failed, data packets would automatically find alternative paths through the network. This was Beer's vision of distributed information coordination, but built as a public infrastructure. Anyone could connect to what we now call the internet and build on it. The demand was much greater than expected.
The web is incredibly exciting because it is the fulfillment of a lot of our dreams that the computer would ultimately not be primarily a device for computation, but metamorphosize into a device for communication.
Through the 80s and 90s, companies started building on this public internet infrastructure, and they operated like any business in a city that uses roads and electricity. The internet was the shared foundations, and companies built services on top. Exactly what Beer had envisioned, but with a crucial difference. Instead of optimizing for social needs, each company optimized for profit. And Beer himself had written that he found it disturbing how well profit worked as a decision-making goal. It seemed to get everyone to provide products people wanted and needed at all times. And this worked thanks to the magic of a market price mechanism, which ensured that supply met demand. People got what they wanted, and the innovation never stopped. The price signals controlled the system automatically. He realized that markets were cybernetic systems too. Take Amazon.
In the spring of 1994, I came across the statistic that web usage was growing at 2,300% a year. Basic technology is fairly simple. Problem was ubiquity of that technology, and this looked like, because of that growth rate, the first time ever that the basic technology needed to do electronic commerce in an acceptable way would be ubiquitous.
The internet wasn't just a way to sell books, it was a way to gather massive amounts of information about what people wanted, and then use that information to maximize profit automatically, deciding what books to stock, which suppliers to use, and how to price everything. And then something crucial happened. Amazon stopped just using the internet and started owning the market itself. They no longer sold books online, they became a global store for everything. Their real power was becoming this market. Google did the same thing with search and then advertising. Apple did it with app distribution.
What we call the App Store. And we're going to put it on every single iPhone with the next release of the software.
They became the only place to sell your app, and these companies grew into something unprecedented. The entire experience of their users was mediated by computer algorithms. Whenever have you talked to somebody at Google or Facebook? And so the final problem to solve with Beer's vision was the automation of the most difficult decisions humans were still needed for, the fuzzy decisions. Unlike math or logic problems, these were judgment calls that don't have a clear right or wrong answer. Beer called these out as heuristic decisions. At the time, he didn't have a solution. But internet companies made quick progress. Take Netflix in the early 2000s. They started with human merchandisers manually organizing movies into categories and lists, just like a video store. But as their catalog grew, human curation became impossible. Their first breakthrough was moving to algorithmic recommendation, using the viewing patterns of users who liked similar movies as you, known as collaborative filtering. I did a video on it. Suddenly, their users got what they wanted without a single human curator involved. Facebook made this kind of change with their timeline in 2009.
Face with like a solid colored background, like not all crappy like that, right?
Yeah.
Before, you saw posts from friends in chronological order. Suddenly, algorithms started picking which posts you'd see based on holding your attention as the goal. And people were furious at first. But behind the scenes at Facebook, they saw engagement go through the roof. Doom scrolling had arrived.
No, I'm gonna have to go ahead and ask you to come in on Saturday.
A turning point was 2012 when neural networks proved they could recognize patterns in data better than humans, starting with images and then everything. And I would say YouTube is the perfect example of this. In 2012, 400 hours of videos were being uploaded every minute. And they tried having teams of human creators to create lists of videos they think people would like. But then they switched over to an algorithm powered by a neural network which learned patterns from user behavior. Once they made this switch, hardcore YouTube users revolted because they started seeing videos from channels they didn't subscribe to. But similar to Facebook, internally, the total watch time went through the roof. The YouTube algorithm was giving them what they didn't know they wanted, instead of just what they knew they wanted. Both platforms discovered the same thing. Computer algorithms powered by neural networks were better at decision-making than human editors and managers. This information aggregation has now extended to government itself. Take prediction markets like Kalshi that allow people to bet on, say, what party will control Congress, creating real-time market signals about political outcomes. When millions of dollars shift based on policy announcements or campaign developments,
I will not be seeking re-election to this United States Senate seat.
Politicians see instant feedback on how their decisions might affect electoral prospects. The market odds become another data stream feeding back into the very government decisions being predicted. And so they achieved Beer's complete dream. Smartphones became the dials in every home that he had envisioned for Chile. Citizens constantly input their preferences, now through clicks, views, and purchases. And algorithms process that data and decide what you see, think, buy, and even eat, exactly as Beer predicted, but at a global scale, learning constantly from every human interaction. And here we see the strange convergence. Both ideologies, capitalism and socialism, ended up in the same place. Both reached towards an AI-managed system where humans aren't really steering anymore. The question left is what guides or controls these systems, known as the objective function or goal. Profit, which emerges from millions of individual choices, or something a small group of humans try to decide as a goal. And regardless of what we choose, we have to face something Beer was grappling with decades ago when he wrote, "We may find that a computer has invented a strategy beyond our own ability to understand." The question isn't just whether we can trust AI with profit as its goal, or with goals humans design, it's whether we can trust AI decisions with any goal. The concern is that these centralized control mechanisms create perfect infrastructure for superintelligent AI to plug in and gradually take control. Companies are developing general AI systems vastly more capable than any person, company, or nation. Systems that could be better, faster, and cheaper than any human at any job. As such systems become more sophisticated, humans get pushed further out of the decision-making loop entirely, until one day we hand over the last bit of our control over the world. This isn't wild speculation. Even the top experts building these systems are warning about the path we're on. In 2023, over 350 AI experts, including multiple Nobel Prize winners, the most cited AI scientists, and even AI company CEOs, signed a statement calling AI extinction risk a global priority alongside pandemics and nuclear war. This is the focus of Control AI, a nonprofit sponsoring this video. If you're concerned about what AI means for our future, they've created tools to help you join over 10,000 other concerned citizens to contact your representatives about AI safety in under a minute. Visit controlai.com/art if you want your voice heard on what might be the most important issue of our time. And so Stafford Beer spent decades trying to solve the coordination problem. And we succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but not in the way he intended. And now we will face the consequences of that success, for better or worse.
Let us suppose that these elements of the state are the big departments of state, like the foreign affairs and the economy. And I built it up on a piece of paper, and then I got to System 5, and I drew a big histrionic breath, and I said, I was going to say, this, compañero presidente, is you. Before I could say it, he suddenly smiled very broadly, and he said, ah, System 5, at last, the people. That was a pretty powerful thing to happen. It had a very big influence on me.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you would like to stay up to date on new videos and projects I have coming, please join my email list. I have something coming up I think you'll be interested in.